The scorching heat of the Nevada desert bounced off the gleaming windows of Desert Star Motors that afternoon as Linda pulled her old SUV into a quiet corner at the edge of the lot. There was nothing fancy about her look. She wore a plain cotton dress, well-worn sandals, and slung over her shoulder was a battered purse that had seen better days. But today, nestled inside that purse, she was carrying not only her keys and wallet, but also a secret that could turn her whole world, and maybe everyone else's too, upside down. When Linda pushed through the glass doors, she was hit by a blast of icy air conditioning that felt almost shocking after the drive. She paused for a moment, letting her eyes adjust to the bright lights. Around her, employees strolled past in polished shoes and crisp shirts, each of them looking her up and down without bothering to hide it. The new car smell, leather and freshly waxed paint, hung heavy in the air, but it did nothing to lift the invisible pressure. There was an unspoken rule here, Linda realized. People noticed everything, and anybody who did not fit the perfect image stood out more than they might expect. At the front desk, a cluster of employees gathered, sharing, quiet chuckles and glances that spoke louder than words. It was clear they had already decided Linda was out of place in this world, full of shiny cars and polished floors. The judgment was not loud, but that almost made it worse. It showed up in the fake smiles they gave her, in the sideways looks, and in the whispered comments that floated, just barely audible, and stung like little barbs. Linda walked further inside, moving between the bright displays and spotless vehicles with her head held high. She felt every stare, the way each person seemed to size her up, like they wondered what trouble she had dragged in from the relentless Nevada sun. The feeling was sharp and real, but she would not let it break her composure. Instead of letting the moment shrink her, Linda chose to pay close attention to how people behaved, what they said, and all the things they held back. She wanted to see for herself what kind of place Desert Star Motors really was, beneath all the polish. For Linda, it was not just about the cars or the money. It was about understanding the truth of the place and the people inside. In the middle of the showroom, Margaret, the manager, stood tall and watched everything unfold with sharp, careful eyes. She was known throughout Desert Star Motors for sticking firmly to the rules and for making sure everyone else did the same. Her reputation for being strict and keeping things in order was almost legendary among the employees. It did not take Margaret long to spot Linda among the crowd. She took one look at Linda's old dress, scuffed sandals, and that worn purse, and instantly decided this visitor was not the sort of customer they usually hoped would walk through the doors. Margaret moved toward Linda with a steady stride, her shoulders straight and her expression carefully controlled. Meeting Linda's eyes, she managed a tight smile that barely warmed her face. Her words were polite, but each sentence was picked to keep Linda at a comfortable distance, to remind her this showroom was a place with standards. Margaret's whole presence gave off a kind of silent warning. Here, she seemed to say, power did not just show up in the company policies or handbooks. It was also there in all those little invisible lines about who belonged and who might always feel like an outsider, no matter how well they behaved. Linda, determined not to be rattled, smiled and asked Margaret if she could take a look at the newest electric SUV Desert Star Motors had just announced. Margaret, never losing her composure, responded with carefully worded excuses about company policies and insurance requirements. She said that special viewings needed to be scheduled ahead of time, and that, unfortunately, only certain qualified clients could tour that area of the showroom today. Her voice stayed polite, not a note out of place, but every word made it crystal clear. There was a line here, and Margaret did not plan to let Linda cross it. Nearby, two other employees, Tom and Crystal, lingered by the coffee station. They were not part of the conversation, but their glances spoke volumes. The two exchanged small, satisfied nods every time Margaret politely blocked another question or gently guided Linda away from the cars, marked exclusive. It was obvious they approved of how things were being handled, how things had always been handled around here. Still, Linda did not lose her cool. She listened calmly, never showing frustration or anger, just nodding along. That peaceful determination in her eyes seemed to bother Margaret more than any outburst could. After all, for people so used to setting the rules, it was unsettling to find someone who would not just quietly play along. When Margaret firmly denied Linda's request to get closer to the flagship electric SUV, it felt like the entire mood in the showroom tightened. Conversations grew softer, as even those at the far corners seemed to sense the sharp tension. Everyone was waiting, expecting Linda to lower her gaze, offer a quick apology, and slip out just like so many others who had been brushed aside before. But Linda did not back down. She simply nodded. Taking the printed list of used cars Margaret handed her, a list covered in worn-out models and older-year trucks, none anywhere close to the luxury vehicles on display. Linda glanced over the list and then, with a calm voice, asked Margaret why she was being shown only the cheapest vehicles when she had specifically asked about the newest model. The question hung in the air, direct but gentle, as if Linda truly wanted to understand but was not looking for a fight. Margaret's face tensed, a hint of pink coloring her cheeks, but she quickly hid her discomfort behind a wave of explanations about dealership policy and interest rates. To the employees, it was awkward to see their manager squirm, but Linda stood quietly, letting the silence push Margaret further behind her official excuses. As Linda stood there with the list of used cars, a quiet wave of laughter and whispered jokes moved through the staff at Desert Star Motors. The tone grew colder, and a few employees could barely hide their smirks. Some customers, sipping coffee or flipping through glossy brochures, paused and turned to watch the exchange. A few seemed strangely interested, as if waiting for some sort of scene, while others looked uncomfortable, suddenly aware they had stumbled into something more than a regular sales pitch. Linda felt the pressure in the room, but she did not let it change her. She kept her mouth shut, looked Margaret in the eye, and folded her list slowly, making it clear she would not be rushed or embarrassed. That kind of quiet strength drew a new kind of attention. Without saying a word, Linda was showing everyone. There was something off about how these things were handled. She did not need to argue. The way she kept her head held steady did all the talking. With each slow, steady step deeper into the room, Linda pushed back on the unspoken rules, with just her presence, leaving a silence behind her that was hard for anyone to ignore. The message was simple. She was not going to disappear. Without making a show, Linda reached out and lightly touched the front grille of the newest electric SUV, the same car Margaret had strictly told her to avoid. The reaction from Margaret was immediate and loud. Her sharp voice echoed through the room, drawing everybody's eyes. The embarrassment spread fast, stopping even the cockiest employees in their tracks and wiping the grins from their faces. For a moment, the whole place felt frozen, everyone looking from Linda to Margaret, waiting for what would happen next. But Linda did not flinch. Instead, she kept her gaze steady and quietly asked Margaret who was actually in charge of making decisions here. The question was soft, but it carried real weight, and the meaning was clear. Was this really about rules, or was it about something else? Margaret seemed caught off guard, her grip on the situation slipping as the room's attention landed squarely on her. The confidence she had before began to fade, and her reply came out more as a command than an answer. She firmly told Linda she had to leave right now. Yet even as Margaret raised her voice, many of the people watching seemed to realize this moment was not just about a car anymore. After Margaret's command echoed through the showroom, a thick silence fell over everyone. Eyes darted between Linda and the door, as if waiting for her to collect her things, apologize, and disappear. But Linda, standing calmly beside the gleaming electric SUV, surprised them once again. She looked around, taking in the faces that, just moments before, had watched her struggle, and with a small, genuine smile, she simply said, "Thank you. I am sure today will be a day none of us forget." Her voice was steady, not bitter, and her words seemed to hang in the air for a long moment. Without hurrying, Linda turned and walked toward the exit, her shoulders relaxed and her head held high. There was no sense of defeat about her. If anything, there was a quiet dignity in the way she left. Even people who had smirked or whispered earlier now watched with something like respect, or at least a hint of regret. As the door closed softly behind her, the usual shine and buzz of Desert Star Motors felt a little duller, the air thick with questions nobody wanted to say out loud. For the first time, something real had cracked the surface, and it left everyone unsettled. Just as Linda was about to step outside, she paused and turned back, her gaze landing squarely on Margaret and the group of employees who were now shifting uncomfortably. In a clear voice that carried across the now silent room, she asked to speak with the owner of Desert Star Motors. Margaret's reaction was as swift as ever. She shook her head and replied that the owner was out of reach, mentioning busy schedules and private meetings, all with a tone that left no room for argument. Linda, however, did not look one bit discouraged. Instead, she reached into her purse, pulled out her old flip phone, and looked right at Margaret as she announced she would call the owner herself. She explained that she had met him last spring at a local business conference downtown, right here in Chicago, and he had given her his number in case she ever needed anything regarding the dealership. The room went from unsettled to almost frozen. The employees' earlier confidence vanished. The customers, who had just been passing through, now watched closely, curious to see how this would play out. No one said a word as Linda began to dial, and you could almost feel the tension shift to outright nerves. Linda's phone call lasted less than a minute, but the effect was instant. She spoke quietly, just a few words, yet people caught the name Jonathan Rogers, the regional director who everyone at Desert Star Motors knew by reputation. Hearing his name pass through the room was like turning down the temperature in the middle of July. Everyone stopped moving, holding their breath, realizing this was now bigger than a car sale. Margaret, who had led the show all afternoon, suddenly seemed smaller. Her firm grip on her clipboard tightened, as though it might keep the situation from slipping away. The joking among the staff had faded completely, replaced by glances full of worry or curiosity. A few employees straightened their jackets and checked their faces in the reflection of the showroom windows, unsure what would happen next. The customers, too, seemed to sense a shift, standing in awkward clusters near the exits, half watching the door and half watching Linda. There was an uneasiness hanging in the air. Some wondered if Linda was somebody important. Others just hoped not to get drawn into the conversation when Jonathan arrived. The usual energy of Desert Star Motors was now heavy, wrapped in the kind of suspense that makes time move slow. A few minutes passed before Jonathan Rogers walked in through the glass doors of the dealership. The sound of his shoes hitting the floor was steady and confident, and he seemed to take in the whole scene with one quick, thoughtful look. He did not waste a second. His attention went straight to Linda, and as they met, there was nothing stiff or forced about his greeting. He smiled, actually shook her hand, and even a few nearby customers could hear him say how good it was to see her again. Just like that, the mood flipped. There was no room for anyone left to question Linda's influence. Employees who had barely glanced at her before now stared, and even the customers picked up on what was happening. Margaret, still standing near the counter, looked as if all the energy had been drained from her. The other staff shifted in place, clearly wondering what would happen next. Jonathan wasted no time. His tone was serious, and when he called for everyone to gather around, it was more of a command than a request. You could feel something had shifted in that moment. The old pecking order was gone, and whatever happened next, nobody could pretend things were the same as before. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere felt a little like waiting out a thunderstorm. People sat rigid in their chairs, some tugging at their ties, others glancing anxiously at their phones, but not really seeing anything. Linda took the seat right at the center of the table, and the way she held herself made it clear. She was completely comfortable there. Even though she hardly raised her voice, everyone seemed to pay attention, picking up on her calm authority that did not rely on shouting or drama. Jonathan did not waste time with small talk. He looked directly at the gathered group, then said, in a straightforward tone, that Linda was now the new owner of Desert Star Motors. For a moment, it was as if time stopped. No one knew where to look. A few gasped softly. A couple looked down at their laps, and Margaret in particular gripped her notepad so hard her knuckles turned white. All the little acts and excuses that had just filled the air outside now vanished. Nobody spoke at first, but the embarrassment in the room was heavy. Any rushed apology would have sounded hollow with Linda sitting there, just watching them quietly, letting the truth settle in. Margaret, who had always seemed in charge, now looked very small in her chair. Her fingers fidgeted with her clipboard, and when she finally tried to speak, her voice shook so much that a few of her words were lost. She blurted out an apology, something about pressure and misunderstandings, but it was barely more than a whisper. As she blinked back tears, her tough exterior faded, and the rest of the team saw a completely different side of her. Around the table, people who just hours ago had rolled their eyes at Linda or laughed along with Margaret now sat in quiet regret. Nobody needed to say out loud what they were all feeling. The embarrassment and guilt were written on every face. Linda did not look for revenge or try to make anyone feel worse. She simply nodded, letting everyone know she had heard Margaret. Her next words cut quietly through the tension. She explained that respect was something built on how people treat each other, not on the job title printed on their badge. That truth settled quickly over the group, heavier than anything else said that day. When Linda finished, nobody tried to fill the silence. Instead, they let it linger, already beginning to reflect and rethink how things could change. Linda leaned forward just a bit, looking around at the faces now focused on the tabletop or their own hands. Her voice was quiet but carried through the room as she posed a simple question. She asked if, had she not been the owner, would she have received the same respect she was getting now? The question seemed to hang above them much longer than any of her earlier statements. No one dared to look up. A few shifted uncomfortably. Not a single person tried to answer. It was obvious what Linda meant. She was not looking for anyone to defend what had happened or to offer quick comfort. Instead, she wanted everyone to really stop and think about how they treated people who walked through their doors, regardless of their position or what they looked like. There was no escaping the truth that the culture at Desert Star Motors had been built on old habits that clearly needed changing. Though the silence in the room was awkward, there was also something honest about it. For the first time, everyone seemed willing to admit things had to change. The realization was painful, but there was a sense, too, that they could use this moment to start over and build something better. Linda took a breath and stood up, asking everyone to stay. She wanted a real conversation. Not one about sales numbers or customer surveys, but something deeper. Gathering everyone together, she pulled her chair in just a little and invited others to do the same. Her words were steady as she pointed out that what truly mattered was how people treated each other, whether they were meeting a stranger or working side by side every day. Linda explained that Desert Star Motors needed to set a different example, not just in selling cars, but in being decent to everyone who walked in and in treating co-workers with the same respect. She encouraged people to share their thoughts, even those who usually stayed quiet. Gradually, a few spoke up. Someone admitted to sometimes ignoring a teammate's ideas or brushing off customers if they didn't look like they could afford a new vehicle. Others nodded, seeing themselves in that confession. It was not an easy talk, but it was honest. Linda listened, never judging, letting folks say what had been on their minds. By the end, the room felt less tense. The silence that followed was not heavy anymore. It was the kind that comes when people are really listening and want to do things differently. Linda explained that she was rolling out a new training program for everyone, herself included. Even Margaret, who had once called most of the shots, was expected to be part of it. This was not just a box to check off or a slideshow to watch while pretending to pay attention. The plan was to shift the way people thought about each other from the ground up. No one would be exempt. The whole point was to break down old habits, challenge any lingering bias, and help people speak with one another in a better, more open way. Linda spoke directly, saying she wanted every single team member to feel respected and seen, not just as another employee, but as a person with ideas that mattered. She was honest about the fact that it would not be easy. There would be awkward moments when people tripped up or had to face things about themselves they had never noticed before. But Linda was firm. If anyone could not commit to these changes, there would be no place for them at Desert Star Motors moving forward. Her voice was steady as she said it. What mattered most was honesty, humility, and the willingness to keep on learning, no matter the job title. The quiet that followed Linda's announcement was nothing like the tense hush from before. This time, it felt steady and thoughtful, a kind of stillness where everyone was weighing not only their own choices, but also what working together could actually mean now. After a couple of long moments, Chris, who had always kept his head down and avoided conflict, spoke up first. He admitted he sometimes went along with jokes or kept silent when he should have said something, figuring it was easier not to rock the boat. His voice cracked as he talked, but he looked everyone in the eye. Lucy, usually cheerful but never too serious, chimed in right after. She said she felt guilty for brushing off feedback from newer staff, and she promised to start listening for real. Even Margaret, still a bit shaken, managed to say she was sorry for her harshness. She confessed that she had thought being tough was the only way to keep the dealership running smoothly, but now she realized she had been part of the problem. With each honest admission, something shifted. People seemed lighter, almost relieved, realizing that they were not alone in wanting to do better. For the first time, the group actually saw themselves as a team with the ability and responsibility to help fix what had been broken. Not long after the wave of confessions, Daniel, who had managed the finance office for nearly a decade, spoke up with surprising resolve. He said he was completely behind Linda's push for a new culture. Daniel admitted he used to focus only on the hard numbers. How many deals closed, how many dollars brought in every week, which sometimes made him overlook the human side of things. He explained that he now understood those cold metrics meant little if people did not feel respected or valued for who they were. Daniel looked around the room and said Desert Star Motors had a real shot to be known not just as another dealership on Route 66, but as a place where everyone mattered. He pictured their reputation for inclusion, reaching beyond the city, making an impact all throughout Arizona and even influencing other dealerships across the country. Those words seemed to fill the room with a new kind of energy. People started to lift their heads. You could actually see hope in their eyes. For the first time, they were not watching each other with suspicion or waiting to see who would mess up. Instead, there was a shared feeling of inspiration, like everyone was finally heading in the same direction, ready to learn from one another and do better together. When the meeting finally ended, Linda wandered slowly through the wide showroom, her shoes making soft sounds on the shiny tile. The morning light poured in through the glass windows and bounced gently off every car, making them look different somehow, like they were part of something bigger than just another sales day. Linda smiled to herself, feeling the place shift from its old heavy air to something warmer. The polished hoods and chrome details looked inviting, reflecting not just the image of success or luxury, but a feeling that anyone could belong here, starting fresh. As Linda reached the row of new trucks by the entrance, Margaret came over, no longer carrying her usual guarded expression. She stopped next to Linda and, in a quiet voice, thanked her for the second chance. There was real humility in her words, something Linda had not often seen from her before. Linda met her eyes, steady and kind, and said that real change was about what people did every day, not just what they promised in a meeting. She explained that from now on, Desert Star Motors would stand on respect for one another and the courage to admit and fix their mistakes. Margaret nodded. Together, they stepped forward into a new chapter. As the sunset light stretched in through the front windows and wrapped the cars in a golden glow, the team at Desert Star Motors eased back into their daily routines. There was something different in how people moved and spoke now. Chris took care to smile a little more, making sure he listened when a co-worker had an idea. Lucy offered help in the service bay, even pausing to check if a new employee needed a hand. Daniel kept one eye on the numbers, but also made a habit of stopping by everyone's desk to ask how they were doing, no longer only caring about the bottom line. You could almost feel the old nerves fall away, replaced by small acts of kindness that weren't showy, just real and genuine. When customers wandered in, they were greeted with open faces, no more silent judgments or hasty assumptions. The place that used to feel rigid now buzzed with a sort of gentleness and shared spirit. Linda watched from her office, knowing there would be tough days to come. Changing deep habits never happened overnight. Still, she saw, in every conversation and every little act of respect, proof that the first steps toward a fair and caring culture had finally been taken. From there on, every guest would be met not for how they looked, but for the dignity they carried within.